begin with the end in mind, put first things first. And it's really a joyful process because you don't have to get into too much left brain engineer stuff because the blueprint is already there. You're just now massaging your words into the structure in the characters' voices.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. So what if I told you that a 7-year-old's 4 lines about tulips written on a coffee shop napkin could become the foundation for a novel and album that's actively transforming lives? That somewhere right now, readers aren't just consuming a story, they're using it as a roadmap to remember who they were before the world told them who to be. Today, we're joined by someone who's created something truly extraordinary, a work that doesn't just entertain but also invites transformation. J.W. Kindbloom, otherwise known as Mark Firehammer, is the author of Echo and the Voice, a novel that's all about the tension between societal conformity and authentic living through the journey of a musician. And we're going to dive deep into all of that. We have a great episode prepared for you. And without further ado, welcome to the podcast, J.W. Kindbloom.
You could just call me Jay.
We're just going to call you Jay then. All right.
Thanks, Danielle. I appreciate your intro, and I'm happy to be here.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Of course. And, I think that the first question we're just going to have to lead with then is a little bit about that pen name. Why the pen name and how did it come to be?
Yeah, I love answering this question because it means a lot to me. The first thing is that Firehammer never really fit me. I'm a soft, high voice storyteller, gentle, and Firehammer is always very aggressive. And even 20 years on the road as a musician, it didn't really work. People expected something heavier and harder and more, aggressive. So my mother passed earlier this year. She was 98, and her ancestral name from Sweden is Kindbloom. And like so many American immigrants, immigration would change the name at Ellis Island so that Americans could pronounce it. And she turned into an Erickson and then married my dad, a Firehammer. But Kindbloom is kind of an honoring of her. In a family of 5, she was really my only ally. So it's kind of my way to put it out there and say thank you to her for being there for me.
I love that. And it's also really funny just by nature because you said that, you're not quite a fire hammer, but kind's bloom is kind of the opposite of that kind bloom,
Yes,
like
that is
flowers.
interesting. Yes.
Very serendipitous. I like it though.
And it didn't have anything to do with the tulip. It
That
just
too.
was, there are no coincidences. It just made real sense that it all came together.
Oh, that's really cool. So great. And I know the context of that. So guys, if you're looking for Mark's book later on, just make sure you check out that pen name. That's how we're gonna find it. So yeah, let's dive in a little bit about the book itself then, Echo and the Voice. Why structure the book around, the metaphors of echo versus voice? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was really about process. When I first set out to write the book, I had an outline of a story that I knew I wanted to tell, but I didn't know what form it would take. And of course, an outline always reads like a how-to because it's just kind of data points.
Mm.
And the more I got into it and the more I listened to, advice I'd gotten early on as a songwriter, I needed to put the advice that was in the outline in the voice of a character. And so the next step was to go down that path of, okay, what style of writing? Is this going to be autobiographical? Is it going to be pure fiction? And I ended up in allegorical fiction. And so it's a very lyrical style. And because I wanted to integrate the songs into it, the allegory was a good choice because of that lyrical style. A lot of the use of the M dash that you see in classical poetry, like Emily Dickinson poetry and things like that. So it just was one of those things that evolved. And since The original title, working title was I Can, I Did, I Will.
Mm.
And that was referring to always coming up against voices telling me you can't do that. Right. They
Right.
they say you should be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever, an engineer. And so that working title disappeared quickly when I got into the allegorical space because then you needed the light and the dark, the protagonist, the antagonist. And of course, in this title, the echo represents what they say. They say you shouldn't do this. They say you should do that. No one ever says, who are they? But all they really is the handed down belief systems that we get from our parents, they got from their parents. We've all heard, oh, what are you going to be when you grow up? Right? They say. So that's the echo. And it's the perfect word for that because it's mindlessly repeated. They say you shouldn't do that. You say you should be a lawyer, right? So then the next step was, okay, so voice. Voice is that still small, you know, voice that a child hears in its head and sees in the magic of the world around him. And me personally, I never stopped listening to that voice. The tulip from when I was 4 and 5 years old is just as fascinating to me today in my 60s as it was then.
Understood. Well,
Yeah,
hey, thank you for walking us through that a little bit. And
sure.
I think it's just a unique perspective on things, and it kind of opens people's eyes in a way, I guess you could say, right?
Mhm.
It's very interesting. Um, so all this being said, then, I mean, it's interesting to me how you have this both as a novel and as an album, though, too. And
Mhm.
I guess you kind of explained that to us a little bit, but how do they like interplay together? Which one came first? Which one came after? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, I get that question a lot because
Yeah.
most people are like, That seems really complex.
Mm.
How does one pull that off?" And if I hadn't already been a practiced craft, learned songwriter of 40 years, and I hadn't already written the songs that kind of tell a story of a young man learning about himself and his place in the world, and doing that steadfastly without fail and without being squashed by the voices of culture, by the echo, if you will. I already had all those. So when the time came to find a way to become an author and include all that work in it, it became just a matter of going back through life and remembering what was happening to someone else or to me, what was happening in the world that caused me to write that down. And I actually have a really cool spreadsheet that's got 100 items on it. And it's by date, starting in the 60s when I was born, all the way through 2025. So that was kind of the way to know which songs belong and where. And it became an easy thing to then write the character according to the people who were involved in the inspirational moment 10, 20, even 40 years ago.
Understood. Yeah, no, that's really interesting that you do that because, I mean, I think in general, it's just very interesting that have a book and an album kind of like combined like that.
It's never been pulled off really, really well.
Yeah, well,
It's not that
clearly,
I've read every book, but I've not seen one pulled off well.
right. Yeah, well, clearly you did it very well. I'm sure you've got a lot of positive feedback from it. From when I looked at it, I really enjoyed it too. So, there you go.
Mm.
Um, And we did talk about the tulip metaphor a little bit earlier. You mentioned it when we were talking about your name, but give our readers a little bit of a context and to anybody who doesn't know. I mean, in the book we have a character Anya. She calls it returning to sacred truth.
Mhm.
So, what does that mean? What's,
Yeah.
where is that? Why is that image so strong in your mind?
Yeah, it's a great question, Danielle. And the reason why Anaya was the character that I wrote to see it is that the tulip represents nature. And one of the things that civilization and culture, depending on where you were born in the world,
Mhm.
has done to the human being, the individual, is it's disconnected us from an intimate understanding that we are part of that nature, right? I think it was Daniel Quinn maybe that wrote the line that before civilization, human beings were a thread in the fabric of life, right? Laid up, intertwined with all the other threads, the birds, the bees, the rocks, the trees, all of it. And civilization disconnected it from that. Now we're not a thread, we're the tailor. Right? A lot of the religious mythologies tell stories that God created the world and just gave it to us to use as we felt see fit. And for me as a child, the tulip was mind blowing. At 4 and 5 years old, I operated at a very slow speed. I just was very still. And I could stare at a tulip for literal hours, so long that I could literally, I swear I could see it moving. I could see it opening a little bit more, kind of like watching the hour hand on a clock. You ever done that?
I mean, kind of, yeah.
You stare
Whenever
at it long enough, you go, oh, I think I saw it. I think I saw it move. So to get to the answer to the question is, as a child, that's obvious because no one has told you that it isn't magic, that it isn't mind-blowing, it isn't amazing, and no one has told you that you're not a part of that. You're as special and unique to that as that tulip when you're 4 and 5. Anaya at 17 is still close to those days of wonder. And
Mm.
she hasn't been completely squashed yet because she's bright and inquisitive and curious. And so she was the one that I wrote the character to realize what Jonas was trying to point out, that that tulip is actually teaching us that we don't need permission to be amazing, to be beautiful, to come up and be a tulip.
That's really cool, and that's something that, I mean, we can all relate to. You know, we've all stared at the clock waiting for it to go by before. So it's very inspirational that you think about it that way. And there was one quote that you said earlier on that really resonated with me. That we're the tailors of the line. I'm trying to find the right words that you use because it was very profound. But
Yeah, we used to be the thread.
right, we used to be the thread, and now we're the tailor.
Right. And if you've never read any Daniel Quinn, he wrote the Ishmael series.
Mm,
Um, it's amazing. I mean, I was introduced to the ideas that Quinn was writing about 30 years earlier with James Michener, a book
okay.
like The Source.
Okay.
And so I think Daniel, you correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel's wife, if you hear this, I think
Mhm.
he's the one that said that prior to civilization, we're a thread in the fabric. We're one with everything. And proof that he's right is that the small pockets of indigenous people that still exist, they see themselves as part of life, not separate from it. Like the American Indians here in the US, they were an easy target for colonial mindset because they couldn't even imagine owning the land. It wasn't in their belief system. They're part of the land, right? It lives and breathes with them. So that idea visually of I'm no longer a thread, I now have scissors and I'm cutting it up and putting borders and fences and deciding who gets what resource and who doesn't. And it's a profound like, whoa, that changes a lot for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I like that you related it back to the indigenous. I think that's a great way to put it, a great way to frame it for people to better understand.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's important that we transition a little bit into the writing process itself, because I'm sure you have a lot of, wonderful insights about it. Oh, wait, actually, before we do that, I want to touch upon the blog posts a little bit,
Mm.
which is really cool. Can you tell the readers a little bit about the way that you structured it with the blog posts and also,
Anaya interviews Jonas, that one.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite things that I've done with this novel because I knew that I had to create an example of someone young going, "Oh my gosh, this is not your average album. This isn't just a bunch of songs that are just randomly put together." And writing them was like being with the person. And since Jonas is based mostly on my persona, I develop very rich character personas as a writer. The first thing I do before I write any scenes is define everything about them. Where are they from? Who are their parents? What's their worldview? Did anything horrible happen to them that, made them be one way or another? Lots and lots and lots of details so that when I write a conversation, their trauma or the absence of trauma informs their answer to the question. And Anaya speaking with Jonas is a special exercise in knowing your character because it had to be authentic. And when I ran it by my I have a group of people that I trust that they're not going to yes me to death. They're going to be honest. And when I released the first few blog posts, resoundingly, everybody was, that is the voice of a 17-year-old, a really smart 17-year-old girl. How in the world did you do that? And the key, as I said, was creating a rich character. And sometimes I would even go online and do a search for what 17-year-olds are saying about certain things today. So I get their language and the way they phrase things. And that helped a lot in the third and the fourth draft of that blog series.
Absolutely. Well, I think, it's funny because I wanted to talk a little bit about writing tips and then I asked about the blog post, but this is literally writing tips because
Yes.
I guess we could learn from that the fact that you really need to have that comprehensive character profile before you start writing. Can you walk us through a little bit more for any audience members who might want to, follow your method for developing a character?
Yeah, sure. It's a method that is not mine. It's a method that I perceived in the world. If you've heard of Stephen Covey,
Yeah,
he
of course.
wrote The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. That book changed my life. I read it in the mid 80s. I was in my 20s. And my writing process today is a reflection of some of those principles, specifically begin with the end in mind. And when I say I don't write a scene until I know the character so well that I could literally walk down the street in a crowd of people and pick the one that kind of energetically and physically is the closest one because I know them so well. It's like an old friend that you knew forever and then you didn't see each other for 10 years. It doesn't matter that they've changed. You recognize them kind of on an energetic level anyway. And that's how I approach my characters. And to do that, you have to begin with the end in mind. What is the story I want to tell? What archetype is my protagonist and what archetype is the antagonist? Who are the other archetypes in the characters? And make sure that you really understand what role they're going to play in the story and the motifs that repeat within that story. Everybody has to have their hand on those motifs once or twice or three times.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So when you do this and you're playing it all out, is there a certain like format then that we should be thinking about then? In terms of like, shorthand, typing, charts,
Oh, oh my gosh. Typing,
Okay.
typing it. My heart flutters.
Ah, okay.
I
No
never
pins
learned to
allowed.
type. Somehow I missed that window, and
Okay.
they never gave me a class in school because I went to three different high schools.
Okay.
So I'm a voice dictate person. I started using drag in 1999, so 26 years ago. And I've never looked back because for me, if I have to type and look at my fingers, or if I have to write with a pen, I
Mm,
the pen doesn't go fast enough to keep up with my right brain, with my creative brain.
right.
So my method, and everyone should try it, only to know that they don't like it or that they do, right? I'm not saying this is the greatest thing for everyone, but I tend to go stream of consciousness onto the page with my voice, eyes closed. No worry about punctuation. And then one of the things I learned from a mentor, George David Weiss, you don't know his name, but you know his music.
Right.
He said the genius is in the rewrite. So as long as all the content got out of my brain and onto the paper, now it's the job of organizing it. And when you go back to the Covey routine, begin with the end in mind, put first things first. If I know my story arc and I know the characters that are telling the story, I now organize what I now have on the page within the structure that the storyline and the characters represent. And it's really a joyful process because you don't have to get into too much left brain engineer stuff because the blueprint is already there. That's the left brain part, that blueprint. You're just now massaging your words into the structure in the characters' voices.
Well, you have a very profound way of describing all of this. You really make it out to be something that is not only useful but enjoyable too. Like the tone you're using, it's it just goes to show how your passion behind it, you know what I mean? So
Yes. Oh my God. I get up every morning excited to grab, a cup of coffee and my microphone and, put onto the page what I thought of in my dream states.
wow.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
a big part of my writing process too, the dream part.
Okay. Yeah. So listening to your dreams and integrating that into the writing.
Yes. And when I'm deep in writing, my dreams become much more literal.
Mm.
If I go to bed, I have a whiteboard. You can't see it, but to my left here, there's a whiteboard. If I'm working on a scene or parts of the book, parts of the storyline, I'll sketch it out rough on the whiteboard with a dry erase pen. Look at it, take it all in, go to bed, and I will dream the pieces that need to fall into that structure. And what's interesting is for me in my life, dreams, if I'm not working on something, are like weird metaphors. You wake up going, what was that? Or what did that mean? Or who is that? And that's never been much fun for me. But when I'm working on something, I literally dream exactly what I need to know. And at times I'll wake up at 3:15 in the morning. I tend to go to bed 9:30, 10. So it's not that early. I've had a good, 5, 6 hours of sleep at that point. And I'll get up, go into my office, and quickly drop in the details of what the dream told me. And then if I want, I can go back to bed and sometimes repeat that pattern again. So the creative process for me is almost 24/7 without a lot of effort, without a lot of angst. I have a lot of compassion and empathy for my creative friends that struggle with the process. And of course, I don't know why they struggle with it. I'm just grateful that I don't and that it tends to flow with me.
Understood. No, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I think people really are going to benefit a ton from this, and after this episode, they can go ahead and try to implement them themselves. So a little couple words on sort of like the legacy here that you're trying to leave with your book. There's a lot of bold messages in the book, things that people could be learning from. For example, the Creative Humanity Alliance,
Mm,
has a lot of, it represents hope, right? It's a call to action in a way. So do you think that's
yeah,
something that's possible in real life?
that's a great question. And I will admit that in the world that we're in today, I have moments of moments of dread. If I watch the news, there's 15 minutes of dread. But
Right.
because I am who I am and I've practiced, being positive, I get right back to the hope. I don't think there's ever no hope. Nothing is ever hopeless. And the alliance is special to me in part because of one, my age, and my journey has been a continuous thread that led to the songs, that led to a novel that the songs belong in. And then the end of the book was specifically rewritten to bring the alliance to life out of fiction. So fiction crosses over into the real world, and Anaya is going to be a big part of that. It launches officially on Sunday night, which is my 63rd birthday.
Oh, well, happy birthday.
Yes, thank you very much. And you'll be able to see what we already have there. And everything that you'll find has been made with that question in mind. What would you make if it would help somebody remember that they had a choice, right? Because that's the problem with what culture does to us by kind of forcing us to forget that we're special before we decide to be among those choices culture gives us, right? And so the Creative Humanity Alliance is all about bringing artists together from all ages and saying, hey, let's create specific things together and create a library that can inspire people to realize they have choices way beyond the ones that they had been handed by, their inherited belief system or culture.
All right. Well, you've offered us a ton of really inspiring advice. And, I don't know about the audience, but I'm very interested in learning more about what you have coming up next. So, are there any projects that we can be excited for in the future?
Yeah, follow-up book is already outlined and started writing that. Anaya is the main character. It's called Voices in the Echo, and I'm really excited about that. The best place to follow it is at jwkindbloom.com.
Perfect. That was going to be my next question. So,
Yeah.
we'll put the link in the description box of this podcast today so everybody can click on over and get to know a little bit more about it and stay up to date. So yeah, Mark, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a really fun conversation. Um,
Likewise. Appreciate it.
it's been very enjoyable. So guys, again, check out the book, head to the website. It's going to be right in the description box. You don't want to miss out on this. I think that we, explored a lot here. It's clear that you've taught us something powerful about the potential of authentic storytelling. You created an entire ecosystem, incredibly strong characters. So amazing stuff. To everybody listening, thank you for joining our conversation. If this resonated with you and sparks your author journey, remember that your knowledge deserves to be shared. Your voice is exactly what the world needs. So keep leading, keep writing, and keep inspiring. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.